Hi, it's Kim Boon. Yesterday, I dropped a quick poll to see when everybody thinks G 2025 will be. So we got over 250 responses, and just over 60% of you think that it will be in May. So from the comments, it seems that people think that today's uncertainty could favor the incumbent, and waiting might turn things from bad to worse. So might as well call for elections early. So thanks everybody for your votes and comments. So today, I want to talk about US tariffs. So in the first draft of this video, I wanted to use this sensational headline. But I changed my mind for two reasons. One, PSP Secretary General has since come out to clarify that position. Second, I felt that the effects of tariffs are too big and its impact to Singaporeans too real for us to be distracted by a clickbait.
In Singapore, we have to work together as one people, closely with the government, united, resolute, fighting on, and not confused by strange ideas or soft solutions. So don't need to do this. We can postpone the problem. We leave it till later on. Somebody else can worry about it. Our future, our problems, we worry about it.
So that was Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong. So two things jumped out for me. The first is on unity. I know elections are coming, but in times of crisis, it is so important for unity among Singaporeans. It does not matter whether you are PAP, WP, PSP, or any of the alternative voices. We all need to work together through these upcoming headwinds. So the other thing that caught my attention was SM Lee's caution about strange ideas. So with tariffs, it seems that not everyone is on the same page on the severity of the issue and the challenging days ahead for Singapore. So I thought that we spend some time walking through the common misconceptions overheard on the street, or e-streets as the case may be. So misconception number one. Okay, this comes in two flavors. There's a group that thinks that US tariffs do not matter because it does not impact inflation. Then there's the other group that does. So both thinkings are missing the point, so let's break it down. The group that thinks that US tariffs cause inflation, this is true, but only in the near term and only for the US. And I think this misconception has a lot to do with what people are hearing on US news channels.
We face a highly uncertain outlook with elevated risks of both higher unemployment and higher inflation.
But the Fed is inclined to hold the line because these tariffs are inflationary.
We're calculating essentially what change that's going to have on some of our raw materials. Our costs are definitely going to go up.
So first of all, the US media are right. Tariffs do cause inflation, but primarily only for the United States. So when the Trump administration placed tariff on every country, every single goods that comes into the US gets taxed. Guess who has to pay for it? Americans. Say you are an American looking for a new pair of jeans. Are you going to buy one imported from China where it has gone up to 104% tariffs? Or are you going to buy one made in the US? Obviously, you're going for the latter because it is cheaper. So when millions of Americans start to do that across all product categories, demand for domestic goods start to go up. Meanwhile, supply chain in the US will take time to catch up, years before new factories can be built. In the meantime, lower supply cannot meet higher demand, so prices go up. So that's the inflation story, and again in the United States. Now, in Singapore, inflation may actually drop in the short term. President Trump is creating all sorts of havoc in the world. So how does that make you feel? I'm thinking a little bit uncertain, maybe even worried. So if you're not sure whether your company is going to be around or if you as an employee are going to have a job, I think you're going to think a lot harder before eating at that Michelin star restaurant or splurging on the latest Jellycat doll. And that reduced spending tends to dampen inflation in the short term. Now, the other group that thinks that US tariffs does not impact inflation in Singapore, not entirely correct either, because it will in the medium term. Because President Trump could get what he wants and successfully move manufacturing back to the US. So let's use Apple as an example. Apple surrenders and agrees to make iPhones domestically. So iPhones require components that are not sourced from the US. For example, rare earth comes from Canada or China, which are tariffed to the wazoo. So bringing those into the US is going to cause iPhones to cost more and price higher. Since it's going to take years before Apple can build those new factories in the US, you will see these more expensive US-made iPhones only years later, which is why tariffs only impact inflation over the medium term. So long story short, inflation does manifest itself for Singapore in the medium term, but the effects of US tariffs on inflation will be nothing compared to what we will discuss later. Now, let's talk about the second misconception. Tariffs sound like problems for businesses and the rich and naughty.
In the near term, we expect weaker global growth, which means external demand for our goods and services will fall. The outward-oriented sectors of our economy will suffer the brunt of the impact. They include manufacturing, especially segments like electronics and semiconductors, biomedical science, which have higher export exposure to the US, wholesale trade and transport will be impacted.
Well, it's true that businesses will be hit, especially those in export-oriented industries, but it's not just these businesses. Each and every single company in the world will suffer when global trade slows down due to higher trade barriers.
I think the first is that there is a clear anticipation of a drop in global demand. Some US-based consumer brands are already advising their supply chain partners to prepare for a mid-term volume reduction of up to 30%. Second, Singapore businesses are facing margin erosion, especially clients requesting their supply chain partners to absorb part of the cost shock from the new tariffs.
So let's say you're a cargo container operator at the Port Authority of Singapore, or PSA. So as global trade slows down, less ships call to port in Singapore, do you think PSA is going to need the same amount of crane operators? Now multiply that effect to all industries. That's when things start to get real and we realize that this is not just a rich people problem. Actually, I just remembered another point. How many of you own stocks in retirement funds? Everything's deep in the red now. So that's another reason why tariffs matter to everyday Singaporeans. Lastly, I want to talk about the third misconception that Singapore is going to come out of this a winner because we are only hit by 10% tariffs while our neighbors are hamstrung by numbers like 46% for Vietnam and 32% for Taiwan. I mean, aren't we more competitive now? Well, not wrong, but this is where we talk about the crux of the US tariffs and its real impact to Singapore. And if you think I have been talking rubbish so far, this is the part you need to listen. It has everything to do with global trade. No doubt we will benefit from being relatively competitive. Put it in actual numbers. Singapore is going to win on the 43 billion exports that we do with the US, but get a world of pain on the $1.2 trillion of total trades that we do with the rest of the world. So PM Wong touched on this during his ministerial statement.
The era of rules-based globalization and free trade is over. This marks a profound turning point. We are entering a new phase in global affairs, one that is more arbitrary, protectionist, and dangerous.
So for decades, Singapore built itself to be a model student in the global trade compact. Our entire ecosystem was built around global trade. So it's one of the reasons why we have 27 free trade agreements and why our trade to GDP ratio is more than 300%. So if I use the commodities industry as an example, Singapore is Asia's largest oil trading hub, second largest agriculture trading zone. So we are home to practically all global traders such as Vitor, Trafigura, Cargill, etc. So using the same commodities example, tariffs will mean less trade, which means less transshipment, which then leads to less usage of Singapore ports. End result, Singapore suffers. Again, you multiply that across industries in Singapore, that is the aggregated impact of US tariffs. So while we tend to gain from being relatively competitive because the US have been so kind to us and giving us only 10% tariffs, the real pain will come from the potential collapse of global trade. Alright, that's all we have for today. So that was me trying to clear up the 3 misconceptions about US tariffs. Are there others that you have heard of? So please share them and your thoughts in the comment section below so that we can all learn. Until next time, this is our Red Dot Perspective.